I would look for, if I were a pharma company leader, is to have a different approach. Not to bombard them with more and more information that they won't be able to digest, but to focus on a mindset change or a communication gap I can help fill in. But first of all, you cannot imagine how happy your words make me and your feedback makes me. Because writing the book has been quite, an out of the comfort zone experience for me. Because the book is, as mentioned, for everyone who are either very interested in the future, curious about it, or have outright fears or anxiety about what comes next. Everyone is talking about AI, while I think the vast majority still doesn't use AI in practice. Maybe, as they said, an Excel spreadsheet with macros that some companies claim that they have AI. On one side, we have 5 million healthcare workers that are missing today, according to the World Health Organization. That number is going to be 10 million by 2030. On the other side, we have more and more patients that require medical help, not because populations are getting sicker, but because healthcare is getting better at diagnosing them, and we can provide chronic disease management for longer time. So essentially, we are getting better at what we do, and life expectancy has been rising steadily. So the only chance we have of providing healthcare as it is today is by reaching out to automation.
Hi, welcome to a new episode of Amplifiz Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are here for personal and professional growth of pharma, medtech, and healthcare professionals. We are welcoming the medical futurist on the show. Good day to you, Dr. Bertalan Meskó. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. First of all, I'm doing excellent, and I've been looking forward to this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. I would assume that most of our viewers know who you are, but for the few that don't know you, maybe a couple of words. You are a physician, a futurist researcher, you are a successful author, you are an international keynote speaker. So basically, you are a busy man.
I like to say I'm focused, not busy, because busy always implies that you have to do stuff that other people tell you to do. I like to think about it in a different way. I'm very focused. I have my tasks lined up, but in most of the cases, I very much enjoy what I do because I always dreamt about combining like two fields or branches of science, the progress of medicine, healthcare technology, and the future's perspectives. And I'm very lucky to be able to do that as the medical futurist. Of course, not alone. I have a very dedicated team to keep supporting me with the content that we produce. Thank you so much for saying that you enjoy digesting on LinkedIn and YouTube. Of course, I do that with that team. We try to be useful for the healthcare, digital health community worldwide.
Tell me a bit more about that mission.
Absolutely. The mission was based on a personal purpose. About 15, 16 years ago, when I was about to finish my PhD, and I realized that I would like to find something that would include the future's perspective, I simply was very interested personally in understanding the context about all the changes in patient empowerment, about the rise of digital health technologies, soon artificial intelligence. So for my own purpose, I started analyzing a lot of studies and reports, news and announcements out there to understand the context around these changes. And the more I could deep dive into these topics, the more I realized that it's just not enough to publish peer-reviewed scientific papers and studies about this transformation that healthcare has been going through, but just like how I had been trying to understand the context, the driving forces, the uncertainties behind this transformation, maybe it would make sense to do the same through science communication. Essentially, do the same kind of job, but not through peer-reviewed research, but through articles, infographics, videos, analysis, everyone can understand.
Yeah, awesome. This is really, really meaningful and reaching a very large audience. So some of the guests we have on the show are from the life science sectors. They are professionals in pharma, in medical device or medtech companies and so on. We want to talk about the present time, but very quickly we're going to talk about the future because that's one of the area of your expertise and we want to pick your brain on that. But over the last 10 years, these pharma and medtech companies have really been scaling and structuring their omnichannel. And how would you evaluate the actual digital maturity of pharma and medtech?
Well, as an ongoing process, I think I've been very lucky to be able to witness this evolution from like the first line of defense, because as a keynote speaker, I've been talking to these companies for actually more than a decade, more than 1.5 decades. And if I try to remember back in the first days, 15 years ago, when I had to talk to these companies about the importance of social media, the importance of the rise of the internet and very simple digital channels, now I have to form these conversations around the rise of artificial intelligence, especially generative AI, and the importance of patient empowerment. But 10 years ago, I had to try to persuade the leaders of these companies to just try to be patient centric. And now that everyone is patient centric, now we are moving, shifting towards patient design, which means that you involve patients at the highest level of decision making within your company, your organization. So for me, it has been all about trying to persuade these leaders not to have fears about the progress that we are witnessing in healthcare and medicine, but to be able to try to be in the forefront of innovation. And of course, it comes with a lot of risks for these companies because they have these ROIs and they have to make sure that they have return on investments every time. But what if they could be the ones driving this kind of change? So from my perspective, this has been all about debates or discussions about the importance of technologies and cultural trends or shifts that we people not working in pharma have been witnessing, but maybe because of the business needs and the quarterly reports, it's a bit harder for pharma companies to realize the value that lies in all these trends and technologies. But I think so far, so good. If you look at any of the major pharmaceutical companies in the top 20 worldwide, all of them have digital transformation trends and strategies. I think all of them are at least patient centric, even if they haven't adopted patient design yet. I think there is zero doubt in the industry that the digital world and channels and internet and social media have immense value in how these companies can approach their target customers, whether those are patients or healthcare professionals. I think many of these companies realize that they can have an impact on what kind of future we are creating for healthcare because they are the ones being able to address very important skill gaps or cultural communication gaps that arise between patients and physicians because these are the companies that again can discuss these issues with these target customers. So I think we are going in the right direction, but of course it's never fast enough.
So we will talk about the value it provides to the physicians or maybe some of the pitfalls that the industry tends to fall into. I don't know. We'll talk about that in a second. But you talked about patient centricity, patient design. Would you like to explain that concept for all of us to be on the same page? What do you mean by patient design?
Absolutely. As far as I remember, I mean, the very first days, so talking about the early 2010s, it used to be such big news that pharma company CEO, for example, announced that they would be a patient-centric organization because it was a new thing culturally, just for a pharma company to say out loud that they want to not summarize, but maybe strategize and form their services and products around the patient, not the other way around, as I think most patients are used to. But patient design is a proactive process, while patient centricity is a passive one, at least for patients. What I mean by that is that if you're a patient-centric company, then of course you ask patients what they think about your product or service or design. But whether you involve their voice in the final decision making is your decision, not theirs. The patients, in fact, are passive in the process. Now, in contrast to that, patient design means that you involve patients at the highest level of decision making, meaning, and it's a good example, I think, US Food and Drug Administration announced a patient advisory board a few years ago, meaning that that patient advisory board, consisting of patient scholars and patient influencers, would have a say in how the FDA would come up with policies or guidelines or recommendations. Now, we want to see the same regarding healthcare organizations. WHO is a good example. I would love to see the same with other companies, with healthcare governments. Again, patients directly advising healthcare ministers. I think that would be the right path forward. To make sure that this could happen, we even published a paper in the Journal of Medical Internet Research with e-patient Dave DeBronkart about the importance of patient design and how we can find real life examples for that in practice.
As a physician yourself, but also speaking and working with them closely, how is this omnichannel engagement is perceived by physicians? What value do they get out of it?
In my new book, Your Map to the Future, I write about two opposing forces that every physician has to go through each day. One is called the fear of missing. Thank you for showing that exactly. I'm sorry for the ruthless self-marketing. But in that book, I describe these two forces in detail. One is called the fear of missing out, FOMO, which means briefly for physicians, especially that if they miss something, if they don't check the report, if they have a study or something that the pharma company sent them, they will miss an important announcement and they would not be able to treat their patients on the highest level of care. But the other opposing force is called the future shock, which basically means that we are simply not able to digest every information we have to go through on an average day, an average person on an average day. So we are in a constant state of future shock. The great futurist Alvin Toffler coined that term with his wife in the 1980s. So we have two opposing forces, and at the same time, pharma companies keep on expecting these physicians to understand all the information they share with them and then to make the right decisions, I guess, towards the products that they have on the market. But it has gradually become impossible to digest all that information. So I think we have arrived to a stage of information fatigue when again an average physician has to digest so much information a day that it's practically impossible to understand and start using all of them. So what I would look for if I were a pharma company leader is to have a different approach, not to bombard them with more and more information that they won't be able to digest, but to focus on a mindset change or a communication gap I can help fill in. So when my physicians, my target audience needs patients who have a lot of technological questions about wearables, smartphone apps, digital therapeutics, or the use of ChatGPT and similar AI tools. I would try to help them find out how to answer those questions. I would love to be the entity or organization bringing that knowledge, that mindset, that approach to these physicians so they can do a better job. And in the meantime, of course, I would try to sneak in the information I want to make sure that they will know about and understand, but I wouldn't focus on the bombardment of information because that's not gonna succeed.
I wanted to ask you about the future of that relationship, what that partnership may look like in 10 years.
It's such an interesting and tricky question because ideally, there shouldn't be any relationship between these two parties or stakeholders. In an ideal way, medical associations and colleges of physicians would be the ones, maybe even healthcare governments, providing the right guidelines and recommendations, all the information, the bits of details, the mindset that medical professionals need to be able to keep on performing at their absolute best. But in reality, that's not happening or that has not been happening. I can only name you maybe two or three medical associations worldwide that actually provided, for example, guidance about very specific AI recommendations. So essentially, how those physicians in that very country should and would be able to use AI, generative AI, while practicing medicine. So in reality, I think what has been happening is that there is this huge skill or knowledge gap that medical associations or healthcare governments should try to fill in, but pharma companies have been doing that quite efficiently. And I think that's where the relationship comes to the table. That's where I find value in pharma companies providing such information, courses, reports, recommendations for their medical professionals in the first place, not with a marketing or product idea in mind, but just to genuinely help them do a better job. Why doing that, they actually form a better relationship. So if I have to foresee the next 5 or 10 years, as I still don't see amazing examples from medical associations or healthcare government, I expect pharma companies to keep on building on that value, that the relationship and the trust that they can build with healthcare professionals while simply doing the job that these other entities should have been doing for a long time.
You mentioned your book earlier, and so I have it here. I happen to read it just for the clarity for my audience. We are not paid to talk about this book. It was just a genuine desire from me to get familiar with your research a bit more deeply than consuming your content regularly. And I really enjoyed it. This is the last book I finished a few weeks ago. I really enjoyed it because on one hand, it is very inspiring and it helps us. So first of all, it's not just for those of us who work in that sector. I mean, I think it applies that it is valuable for anyone in any industry or in any path of life. I really thought it was eye-opening and very practical. You give very clear guidance and advice on methodologies and way to go about that and ask yourself the right question and study that deeply. So I really enjoyed it. The amount of research and references you use are immense. And unlike you, I'm not a futurist researcher, so I didn't know a lot of these authors, and I learned a lot, so I really enjoyed it. And it did stay with me for quite some time, to the point where I made some significant changes recently in my journey, inspired by this book. So thank you for that. In this book, you talk about the importance for professionals or people at large to lead and not to lag. So you talked about HCPs that need to have a change of mindset and so on, but that applies to all of us, and that applies to also the professionals of the sector. So in this time of AI revolution, I wanted to ask you, what future-ready skills or mindset should pharma and medtech professionals start cultivating today, regardless of roles and seniority?
Well, first of all, you cannot imagine how happy your words make me and your feedback makes me, because writing the book has been quite, an out of the comfort zone experience for me, because the book is, as you mentioned, for everyone who are either very interested in the future, curious about it, or have outright fears or anxiety about what comes next. And I wanted to prove that actually anyone can start using futures methods that only futurists have been using for decades in business management and economics, but anyone can learn at least these 6 major methods and a few fun exercises too in the book, from the futures wheel to scenario analysis or forecasting. So thank you so much for saying all these very positive things about the book. Now, regarding your question, I think the first skill is future readiness. Just simply being able to understand that we have a direct impact on what future we would have for ourselves, for our career, for our field of interest, or research field or company, because we have a direct impact on that. And the more exercises and methods we can use to better envision what might come next, or which scenarios we will be happy about, or which are the ones we would like to avoid at all costs, the better position we will be in to make the right decisions. So then we have a higher chance to reach those desired visions. One. Two is definitely prompt engineering. Just simply the ability to write the best, most efficient text-based briefs or prompts for generative AI-based large language models. Because I keep on being confident about the vision that we cannot expect all of us to learn a range of AI-based technologies, to learn to use all of them, because it's simply physically impossible to learn to use all these without any maybe technical or programming background. But we can definitely expect ourselves to learn to use one interface through which we can have like discussion, having a conversation with a person. And by using that large language model, we will be able to interact with a range of AI-based technologies without learning each of them, how to use them independently. So prompt engineering, I think, is a key skill. And the third maybe will be a group of skills. And as futurist who often focuses on the progress of technology, it might be surprising for me to say that it wouldn't be about programming or learning programming languages, but it would be about a group of soft skills, from communication to empathy, problem solving, creativity, intuition, those aspects which I'm not saying are impossible for algorithms to understand or mimic, but those are the hardest ones. So when it comes to computing power or making decisions based on huge amounts of data, we cannot compete with AI. But when it comes to providing empathy and compassion, when it comes to building really detailed strategies that involve not just data, a lot of people within the organization, I think we will keep on being much better at that than whatever AI can come up with. But without futures thinking, I don't see how we can get into a future that we would all agree that that would be the desire for the most of us.
It makes a lot of sense because through conversation we have with customers and professionals in that space, we see that there's already a big wave and a lot of excitement and anticipation from many about what AI can bring and how can they benefit from it, leverage it, how it can bring value to their career and the professional realm. But there's also a lot of anxiety and a lot of unknown. And so what I really liked about the book is the emphasis put on the fact that there are things that we can control, but we are all in the driver's seat of our own life, and we need to be reminded of this because, as you said, the present time and the tsunami of information and things that our schedule is always full. We don't. You started the podcast like this. You are saying, "No, I'm not busy. I'm focused." I mean, wow! This alone was. I think a lot of professionals in the sectors have struggled with that, finding that balance at an organizational level. As we all know, these are very large, complex matrix organization. So it's not just the work of one individual, but this is also a work of an organization and processes and all of this that needs to be reevaluated. How should organization be rethinking these roles, the career paths, or how leadership can help drive that AI revolution?
Wow, what a huge question to ask. I thought, you would have a introduction to a much softer question than that, but it's almost impossible to answer that question. Well,
I
but I
know.
will try.
Some thoughts are welcome.
The reason why it's such an important and complicated question at the same time is that everyone is talking about AI, while I think the vast majority still doesn't use AI in practice. Maybe as they said, an Excel spreadsheet with macros that some companies claim that they have AI while it's not the case. But the technology is the technology is not the most important one and will have the biggest impact on the next decade or so. So it makes sense to understand enough. And for me, that's the key expression here. That we might want to be, as a company or organization, as a leader, we might want to make the absolute best decisions, but it's almost impossible given how much information, potential trends, weak signals on the horizon, potential disruptive events we should all take into consideration. So what at least, I have a very small organization, 12 people working on the medical futurist brand, but what we are trying to achieve is just to make good enough results and decisions about implementing AI at the right stages or tasks within the organization. And my favorite example for what good enough means is about the MRI machine, that every single medical professional must study and spend a lot of time understanding the biophysical basics of how the MRI machine operates. And when someone becomes a medical professional and they start practicing medicine, without, harming my peers or hurting anyone, I think 95% of physicians today couldn't describe how the MRI machine works, even though every single one of them learned the basics and the details in medical school. Still, all of us have a good enough understanding, a good enough scientific understanding and trust about how that machine works. So we know that if I send a patient to an MRI examination, it won't cause any harm because we understand enough. I think that's the same level we should try to achieve with understanding enough about AI. That's why we published a paper in NPJ Digital Medicine about the minimal package of knowledge details, mindset, technological background that every single healthcare professional must understand about AI. But just the basics. What is the simplest definition of AI? What levels of AI we should know about, like artificial, narrow, general, and super intelligence? What is the basic difference between machine learning and computer programs or algorithms? Why is machine learning much more than just writing a computer code? What could be the major dangers or major advantages of using that advanced technology? Just the basics. And I think if everyone understands at least just the basics, we could arrive to the stage where we can make good enough decisions about implementing AI.
I love it. And since you gave the analogy of MRI and imaging systems, I want to go back to your article or content I've seen from you, I believe, was talking about the fact that, in your opinion, AI will not replace HCPs or healthcare professionals, but healthcare professionals using AI will replace over time the HCPs that do not use AI. And I think you were also talking about specific therapeutic area or domains or fields where it might start. And I think about this because you were talking about MRI, and I was thinking of imaging system and others. Can you elaborate a little bit on that belief or that statement you made?
Absolutely, on both. Both are very important and I think very interesting points. The first is about the base. I call it the basic mathematical problem healthcare faces today. I want to make sure that whenever I talk to someone who might not be so much on the same page about the rise of AI, that using AI is not like a choice that we have here. That we could use, we could just allow patients to meet a healthcare professional with every health problem they have, but we choose not to. That's not the case. Healthcare faces a basic mathematical problem. On one side, we have 5 million healthcare workers that are missing today, according to the World Health Organization. That number is going to be 10 million by 2030. On the other side, we have more and more patients that require medical help, not because populations are getting sicker, but because healthcare is getting better at diagnosing them. And we can provide chronic disease management for longer time. So essentially, we are getting better at what we do, and life expectancy has been rising steadily for the last decades. Between these two sides, we find a huge gap, a mathematical gap that we cannot fill in. We cannot train as many physicians as we need, and we cannot ask patients to keep on asking for fewer, times of when they need medical help. So the only chance we have to keep on providing healthcare as it is today is by reaching out to automation, is to allow AI to automate every single repetitive and or database task. So AI is not like a shiny technology that we could reach out to, but AI is our only choice to keep on providing healthcare. And today, 1 billion people still have zero access to healthcare, so we can still expect them to join the healthcare ecosystem. For the other part of your question, and that's why we at the Medical Futurist did the first study in 2020 when we analyzed the FDA's database looking for AI-based medical devices that were either cleared or approved. Because back then the FDA didn't have a dedicated database to that. We found 64. Look why we have to split through thousands of applications and reports. 64. Now the database that the FDA finally published has about 1,250. So in 4.5 years, it's a 20-fold difference. And we are talking about the world's most precisely regulated medical technologies using AI. And then we analyze those technologies. Radiology, as you mentioned, stood out quite clearly. Even today, about almost 80% of all the approvals and clearances are coming from radiology. I think the second is still cardiology, and the third is either oncology or emergency medicine, neurology. And that's why radiology is the clear winner of the whole AI revolution because of machine learning being able to analyze medical images and radiology already being quite task-focused medical specialty. It was prime time for a specialty to get transformed by AI. So now, when I teach medical students, some of them keep approaching me, look, I would love to become a radiologist, but I had doubts because seeing how many AI technologies come out to replace what I plan to do, what shall I do? And then I tell them, you look, I'm sure you didn't want to become a radiologist who would have to go through 50 scans every single day because it's impossible to keep your mind sharp after reviewing 45 scans. But what if you only had to go through 5 or 10 that really require your excellent human expertise, your judgment, your understanding, your creativity, but the rest was taken care of by automation? And your job, the rest of the time you can spend on, is further developing those radiology based AI applications so they can make an even better job to allow you to focus on the even more complex medical cases. That's why I think that while I think for at least a decade, even some investors went as far as to claim that radiology would be obsolete in 5 years. That's of course not the case. I think in contrast to that, what we are witnessing now is that this specialty is becoming one of the most creative specialties in the whole range of medical specialties.
This is really fascinating to listen to you on this. And if we were to do the parallel with pharma and prescription medicine, the fact that, of course, with AI, and it's been a few years already, right? The industry is investing heavily in leveraging AI to accelerate the R&D and the clinical trial processes, which could lead to revolutions if we were to see molecules and new medicine being approved much faster in the future. So give me your perspective on that aspect of the market and what it may mean as well from from a regulatory standpoint, but also even from a reimbursement standpoint. If you think of how it would revolutionize the entire access.
Wow. About the first one, I think there are two groups of examples we have to talk about. One is the quite obvious one with the biggest return on investment for pharma companies, and that has been using AI and now especially generative AI for finding potential drug targets, drug design, and drug repurposing. Simply in those areas, we've seen the biggest results coming out in very popular peer-reviewed studies like the ones coming from DeepMind, Google sub company, showing how they can use AI to elevate the efficiency of protein folding, not to, two or three, but hundreds, if not thousands of times compared to traditional methods. So drug design and repurposing the new drug target, this is the biggest use case for pharma companies. I think without exceptions, all the big pharma companies have been investing heavily into that because they see the potential ROI in that field. The other group of examples is about where the text-based large language models can contribute to the table. That would be like clinical trial recruitment, managing clinical trials, customer service, because that's where these pharma companies can allow these AI models to have interactions with their customers, even patients. There have been a few good examples in that, but not so much by pharma companies making it happen, but startups bringing that large language model expertise into the market, especially in clinical trial recruitment. This was the last year was the first year in my life when I was at a conference that was entirely dedicated to technologies being used in clinical trial recruitment. That was the first for me, at least. Regarding the regulatory part, that's something that's even more exciting for me because as a researcher, I've been analyzing that in detail for years. The challenge that regulators and policymakers have to face today is that there is no time anymore. What I mean by that is maybe 10 years ago, if there was a new technology on the horizon, as long as regulators couldn't find out how to bring that to the market, how to allow that to come to the market, no physician or patient was allowed to use it. Simply that's how the market worked. Now it's different because of global supply chains and the worldwide access to the internet and AI and ChatGPT. Now patients and physicians will find a way. So the unprecedented challenge regulators face now is that it's not enough for them to be fast enough to regulate advanced technologies being accessible today, but they have to proactively think about the next potential versions of that technology. So, for example, when the first version of ChatGPT came out, then with Eric Topol, that I'm sure you all know about, the biggest name, I think, in the digital health and healthcare AI space, we sat down to write a paper about how potential future iterations of large language models could and should be regulated too. Not just the ones that can deal with text, but the ones that will deal with image, sound, videos, even full documents. How should regulators start thinking about it now? So when these iterations become ready overnight, regulations, policies, guidelines, recommendations will be in place. And while I understand the immense pressure regulators must face about that, at the same time, how exciting it can be for a regulator to keep on looking at the horizon and start thinking about potential regulations and regulatory solutions for technologies that are not even accessible today. I think that must be an exciting part of your job these days.
Now I want to talk about how traditional healthcare facilities need to adapt to better support the patients in the future.
As a futurist, I'm always cautious with such questions because I always have to describe that I'm sure everyone knows, but if not, then there is not one future. Even though in almost every language, the future is a singular term, in fact, multiple futures exist, and we have a direct impact on which future we might have a higher chance for. The reason why I'm describing that is that because it gives a picture that It's one thing that I can tell you which trends I foresee in the others. But what really matters is that as an objective researcher, I have to be able to look at all the trends that are out there today and try to pinpoint or highlight those that I think are gaining traction and maybe are even shifting or pointing towards a potential future that will be beneficial for most of us. So in that sense, my job is to look at healthcare from a bird's eye perspective and highlight trends that are happening, not certain technologies. I can also do that, but I find more value in these high level perspectives. For example, the healthcare stage or scenario I'm envisioning is a healthcare in which patients are the point of care because they have been the most underused resource of healthcare, and by making them the point of care would mean that they could receive diagnosis, monitoring, treatment wherever they are. If it's their home through a digital ward, then let be it. If it's a hospital or if it's on their way or in a car, they should become the point of care. By doing that, patients will gradually become members of their medical team. This is an unprecedented cultural challenge for every stakeholder in the team. The physician used to be, the key holder to the ivory tower of medicine, and now they have to learn how to work in a team as an equal level partner with their patients. Many patients used to be passive stakeholders waiting for a symptom to appear, but now they are proactive stakeholders and they want to bring insights and data and opinion to the table. If patients become members of their medical team, then it can be expected that healthcare will gradually become globalized because of the services, variables, AI-based applications that we can have access to without geographical borders. On the long term, it might also mean that there will be a new member of that team. As AI is becoming more and more efficient at contributing to the medical decision-making process, we, the patient and the physician in that medical team, we won't be able to allow ourselves to ignore its recommendations. So a technological entity will sit at the table where only people have been sitting for centuries, if not millennia. We can also dive into, personalized healthcare and all these other aspects. But I think these four major perspectives or maybe trends, I think are the ones that will have a biggest impact on the vast majority of people, regardless of where they live, what kind of healthcare is needed, or what kind of medical specialty they are involved in.
That is very, very good and very helpful. And I do appreciate the word of caution that you gave as an introduction. I did remember from your book, indeed, that there's not one written futures, but what we're going to make out of it. And many futures with a S. Looking at the Medical Futurist Institute, how much of your work is towards the private sector or government? Because, I mean, listening to you, I would love MOH anywhere in the world, the Ministry of Health, to invest time and resources talking to you and making sure that they do the right planning. Not that I'm pitching for your business, but I'm just curious if you don't mind me asking.
Absolutely. I think if I look at all the last 15 years or so, about 5% of the engagement, keynote speeches, reports that I have done were for governments or non-governmental organizations. The rest, I think, I've been talking to pharma companies, health insurance companies, medical technology companies, those organizations that clearly have the biggest motivation to keep on developing new technologies or services to keep on serving patients and physicians. So I understand from that perspective that they are the ones that have been approached me as the medical futurist the most. But whenever we work with governments, to be honest with you, I find the most value in that. Just a very small example about, I think just right COVID, so about 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, I got invited by the Senate of Canada for a public hearing because they wanted to have a researcher's objectives or perspective about including 3D printing, AI, robotics in their healthcare system. And of course, as an objective researcher, I described to them what kind of trends I see on the horizon. 2 years after that, the Canadian Medical Association approached me that based on that hearing, they would love me to create a course through which they could like fill in the skill gaps for their healthcare workforce. And now I'm the professor in residence for 1 year of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons in Canada. For me, it has been an extraordinary experience to have any kind of impact on the country's healthcare system and the way they retrain their healthcare, their already amazing healthcare workforce. And to be honest with you, the the opportunities I'm thriving and working towards or working for are those. When based on what kind of studies we publish and what kind of feedback we get from our, excellent worldwide community, about 1 million healthcare professionals and healthcare leaders, I have the unique position to positively influence how a country retrains their healthcare workforce, how a healthcare organization adopts patient design, or how a pharma company starts moving towards AI to bring cheaper and more efficient drugs to the market. That's what I find my value, and that's why I keep on being quite excited to come to work every day.
This is amazing. Yeah, I can imagine that. Congratulations and kudos to you and to your team for the very positive impact you have at so many levels. And that's amazing. Well, it has been a real pleasure to have you on the show, Bertalan Meskó, the medical futurist. Thank you so much for taking the time to share insights, give us some perspective on the future. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you had a good time too.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much for doing what you do. And I will keep on listening to the show. And if possible, please keep on inviting patient scholars and patient voices too. That's so much to the whole MedTech pharma community. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much. And thank you all very much for watching this episode of Amplifiz Podcast. Please make sure to subscribe, to also follow our guest, Dr. Bertalan Meskó, the medical futurist. And see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.